Welcome back, everybody. Hope you're all feeling refreshed after the break. So in this session, we want to talk to you about a few new generation of technologies. ChatGPT obviously has been the hype of the last few months. We will definitely cover generative AI. But more importantly, we want to talk about real-life use cases and also touch on some of the societal and geopolitical implications. Many of you in the audience know that at Partners Group, we spend a lot of effort on thematics. And it's in that process we've been investigating AI, metaverse, and such for many years. We focus very much on how to invest in the tech stack and also bring them into our portfolio businesses. So for example, Partners Group itself, we've been implementing blockchain for client communication for more than 5 years. And we also have portfolio businesses such as Emeria, TechM, USIC. You will hear about this a bit later in the next session. These businesses have been leveraging machine learning for things like predictive maintenance, improving service qualities, and also setting up brand new business lines. So of course, all of us have our views around how these technologies will evolve into the future. We want to kick off this session with some of our own hypotheses. AI, let's start. We think this is the ultimate decision-making assistant in the future. Applications such as customer service chatbot, auto content generation, these are hitting the enterprise much faster than many expect, perhaps in months. We also think that some of the first adopters are likely going to be low consequence of failure type of situations. So think internal enterprise functions. Infrastructure providers such as data center, such as chip makers, no doubt will benefit as second-order exposure. But we don't think all of the application makers have the right to win. We're rather like those folks that have control of workflow or unique sets of data. They will build the strongest moat. The panel will also touch on metaverse, blockchain, and a few other technologies. These are further out, and no doubt will go through a lot of peaks and troughs along the hype cycle. But nonetheless, we think they offer a lot of potential. Metaverse, for example, we see this as the future front end, offering lots of exciting new ways of interacting with customers. And blockchain, or rather decentralized ledger, we see ultimately it being the new infrastructure backbone for information exchange, but much more massive, much more private, and much more secure. So these are just some of our views on the technologies. Let's now hear from our panelist, Dr. Pippa Malmgren. It's so good to have you with us again.
Thank you.
Pippa is an economist and also a former advisor to President George W. Bush, and also an entrepreneur with founding her own robotics business. And we have Matthew Griffin with us today as well, award-winning futurist and proud father of a 10-year-old who's recently co-authored a book with artificial intelligence. So as promised, let's start with some of the applications. Matthew, if I could.
So if we're having a look at artificial intelligence, I mean, overall, basically, you've got two trends. You can use artificial intelligence to automate a job or a task. However, when you automate a job or a task and you put a fancy behavioral interface over the front of it, like we see with ChatGPT, where really the natural interface is actually the big innovation here, then all of a sudden you democratize access to that job or that task for everybody else. So where Google democratized access to information, AIs that automate jobs and tasks automate access and democratize access to skills. So for example, the book that my son wrote using ChatGPT, he's 10. It would normally take you, what, a couple of months to write a book? It took 20 minutes. We used Mid-Journey to illustrate it. It took 6 hours. Text to image. It was 8 hours to format in Adobe InDesign. By the end of the day, we were selling it. 2 weeks later, we've made £10,000 for charity. So when we have a look at applications, we can move beyond some of these. There is a whole class called creative machines, because Caden, using Mid-Journey, designed a trainer. So we can now convert that 2D image of a running shoe into a 3D render, push it to a 3D printer at either an Adidas store or a UPS depot, and it prints it off. So we have artificial intelligences that increasingly are based on technologies like generative artificial intelligence that are helping design the next generation Airbuses, new drugs, new rockets with hyperganic, all kinds of different things, chips with Google.
What about, so we see that your son has already written this book, which is absolutely amazing consumer use case of AI. What about the enterprise? So if we look at the businesses that we own here and the folks have invested in, how can they leverage this technology?
So it's a great question. So when you have a look at the enterprise, so enterprise is very different to consumer, because when you start embedding artificial intelligence like generative AI into an enterprise, you assume some form of responsibility and liability for the content that it produces. So with a lot of the enterprises that I work with, they are focusing these tools internally, because if these things go wrong, then it's awful, but it's an internal problem. If you use these tools to, for example, generate reports that are inaccurate and you push those to client-facing, if you push those client-facing, then the clients can say, well, we based our investment advice on this report that you didn't actually vet, and we're going to sue you. So when we have a look at enterprise use cases, these are really where these tools can help you augment your decision-making, but also augment your work. So for example, if we take, for example, the Salesforce example, very basic example, but you sit down in front of a computer. Now, if you're a sales guy, traditionally you'd go, I've got to hit a target, and I've got to call a bunch of people. When we talk about using technology to augment the human workforce, these AIs can say, look, I know that you've got 20% of your target to go. I know that you sell these products. Jeff from Walmart tweeted that he loves public cloud. He also likes cats. I've put together an email for you or a call script, and by the way, he's over here today. Go and get him. So what happens when you start using artificial intelligence, which gives you access to all the world's knowledge? You can give ChatGPT a split brain. That's a fun conversation for maybe later.
It's already hallucinating.
You can have access to different democratized skills. So what happens when the only thing that you have access to is all the world's information and all the world's skills? How do you augment your workforce? How do you change basically your personal lives basically to embrace entrepreneurship? How do you live in a world where what you imagine you can bring real?
I mean, this is a really fascinating topic on the future of work. I'm sure all of us are thinking about this over the last few months. Pippa, I mean, I know both of you have very strong views around future of work. How should we think about new roles? Which jobs are going to disappear altogether, and which ones are going to last? They will be very hard to replace. And more importantly, what are our children going to learn? What should they learn at university?
Yeah, well, being in robotics, the first robotic tool was introduced in the Industrial Revolution, 1834. It was the robotic weaving loom for clothing. And we've had nothing but more job creation since that time. So this idea that automation and robotics kills jobs just doesn't add up. What it is what we talked about this morning, is fear of change.
Absolutely.
And what we're in is an incredible period of history when it comes to the pace of change. And to that end, I would say, by the way, this week, or this last 2 weeks, with all the events happening with Silicon Valley Bank and private equity, I think we're going to look back at this moment and say, this was a watershed, wonderful moment for the private equity world, because instead of all the capital being locked up in Silicon Valley, it's about to spread. And it's not just going to go to other hands, it's going to go to other geographies. And we're also going to see spillover into completely new areas of investment. And the key point I would love to make on this is, I think the private equity world is totally drunk on SaaS models. And they do not understand that what this introduces, what AI brings along with a lot of other innovation, is a world where I think we're going to be driven by what I would call shardware. Shardware is where hardware and software interface. So, for example, Mercedes, BMW will make more money out of the 3,500 chips in the car that charge you based on how long did you turn the heater in the seat on, than on the car price itself. And this is going to expand really radically as we get into certain new sectors. And the sector that I really want to talk about that I think will influence every single one of you and every single business you're invested in or running, and that is what's happening in space. And can I just ask quickly in this audience, how many of you are invested in any way in space? Not many. This is brilliant. We are literally at the beginning of something extraordinary that isn't overinvested yet in this matter. So I'll just say a few things on this. Why is it that we're in this massive space race, particularly between the US and China? Number one, because we genuinely believe we're going to have access to unlimited cheap power. Space-based solar energy, which is why the Saudis just invested with the British to develop that in the North Sea. It will blow away the need for hydrocarbons on Earth. So it's going to radically transform any industry that currently depends on hydrocarbons. That's why the Saudis are in. Second, we think it's going to give us access to all of the raw materials that are required for sophisticated manufacturing more cheaply than ripping them out of Earth, because the launch and return costs have collapsed so much. Third, unlimited internet connectivity globally, based on satellites, which means every square inch of the planet is about to rise in value, not only because you can work from anywhere, but because you can track the value of something on the other side of the world so much more easily. Now, the good news is, as we reach for this true abundance, that also becomes the trigger for geopolitical conflict.
Absolutely.
Because whoever gets there first wins. And that is why there's this massive race, particularly between the US and China. So I would say the new quantitative easing is defense spending. And we have to really think carefully about what the implications of this are. But the defense community understands tech is the answer. They cannot get it from the majors, the big prime defense companies.
From the private sector.
It has to be from the startups. And now you can build amazing things with very little capital, partly because of AI.
And
so
I guess they're in
future.
shortage of capital these days.
The thing is, the best companies, Jeff Bezos says at Amazon, his best performing divisions are always the ones with the least capital, because it forces you to use imagination and creativity. That is what's going to pay, not who raised the most money.
Do you care to put some timeline on it? Because we
Yes.
sort of, maybe 5-10 years ago, we had a bit of a start in space, right? Tesla kind of, and Blue Origin got everybody's imagination going. But then, things slowed down a bit. What sort of time frame are we looking?
So the people building the new space-based solar power prototypes tell me they will be totally up and running within about 2.5 years. The moment the market sees that it's real, I mean, Airbus did the first test recently. I was just with their senior management. We know it works. Can it be commercialized? We'll see it in 2.5 years. The moment people actually see it, then they're like, wait, I have to completely change the valuation of everything that's in the hydrocarbon space because of this.
Yeah.
So I don't think we're talking, this is no longer science fiction. We're in a world where this is science fact. And science fact, as we were saying before, is more exciting than science fiction. And our own inability to comprehend this, because we're too busy doing what we do all day long, and don't look up and see what is on the horizon, just leaves you in a vulnerable position.
Well, this is the thing, right? So, Matthew, I wanted to ask you this timeline question, because look at, those of you that, saw the news feed, ChatGPT 4 was launched last night when we were having dinner. And this is 4 months after the first version, and apparently can do amazing things. Can you help us just to, get a grasp of the speed of innovation here? Yeah. When can we see AI writing an entire program or an app? Or even more so, when is AI going to run the accounting department?
So when we have a look at artificial intelligence, so generative artificial intelligence, I've been tracking it for 10 years. It's not a flash in the pan. That's it. I wrote a book on it 4 years ago and everything else. So when we actually have a look at the speed, of change, we're almost in the space where today we can actually change the entire global financial system today. By today. like in 24 hours. A very quick example of that is when we have a look at the planet, basically we have 4 billion people connected. If you're a digitally connected society, then Facebook in June 2019 released Libra. Now, when you have a look at Libra, if the regulators had actually gone, yes, we'll let you release this, which they didn't, conversation in itself, then Mark Zuckerberg could have conceivably had up to 2 billion people using Libra by the end of the day. Now, in the words of the chairman of the People's Bank of China, the Bank of England, the European Central Bank, the US Fed, that would have changed the global financial services system overnight, as well as actually made Facebook one of the largest forex countries on the planet. So when we have a look at the pace of change, digital change basically is incredibly fast. Because what we have is we have faster computers, basically we have money pouring in, we have interest, we have urgency. So naturally we move from GPT-3 to GPT-4 quicker. Because suddenly there's this, wow, look, what have we got? We've got this amazing thing. Let's see if we can actually really blow it up, dominate the market, change and disrupt industries. But when we actually have a look at the physical markets as well. So a little while ago, Under Armour would normally take about 2 years to go from a design of a trainer to actually having that trainer on the shelf. Similar with Airbus. Same stories basically with Google and computer chips, rocket engines, and all sorts of things. We had a generative artificial intelligence design an Under Armour trainer in under a day. Day 2, it was 3D printed. Day 3, Under Armour had a break. Day 4, they stuck it on the shelf. So where we think the rate of digital acceleration and innovation is getting faster, the rate at which we can produce physical products and things is also accelerating. Toyota used an artificial intelligence.
A lot faster. Pippa, perhaps you have also a perspective.
Well, just to say, the reason the regulators didn't give approval is because they said, we want to be that country. So again, everyone in this audience is going to have to get their head around the introduction of central bank digital currency, meaning sovereigns are digitizing their money. Now, this is important because this is not like a sideline issue. What it means is you're going to get a text message in your phone, and it's going to say, if you register, you can have $1,000, figure the number. None of us in this group will care, but the average person, that's a lot of money. So they're going to say, yeah, I want that free cash, and they're going to put their details in. Now, everything on that phone becomes accessible to government, and that'll be the same for every company. All your internal stuff becomes part of a broader database. Now, why does government want this? Because more visibility of what's actually happening in the economy, more connectivity. But it means that allocation of capital will be different. So in the past, when we had crises and government allocated to banks with quantitative easing, I would say in future they're going to allocate to entities that have true power. That could be a partners group begins to be the entity that government designates. If we give them the capital, they will be able to appropriately spread it around.
So the instrument
shifts the balance of power.
The instrument of monetary policy making essentially becomes a lot more of a precision surgery rather than sledgehammer, which we're all
100%.
Suffering from these days.
100%. And also, let's be clear, Silicon Valley Bank was the first digital run on a bank in history. That's why they couldn't deal with it. It was so fast. So the speed at which this is moving is quick, and that's why digital sovereign money is coming much faster than we think.
Also, just quickly on the CBDCs.
1 minute.
It allows, so CBDCs will allow you to understand what is going on in your entire economy at the granular level instantly, which means that if you want to boost sales of coffee in Shanghai, basically you can suddenly put a policy in force that reduces tax.
Yeah.
So you have real-time policy monitoring
100%.
and policy development.
Look, this has been such a fascinating discussion. I've got so many more questions for you, but I want to give our audience a chance to also participate. So I will put in one last one, and my colleague Angelique and Joyce will be sending the mics around, so get your questions ready. Pippa, you've walked the halls of government, and these topics that we've just talked about, are lawmakers looking at it? Are they talking about it? What role do they anticipate themselves to play? Bottom line is government will always be miles behind on any of these important issues. They can't keep up, which is why our role in, for example, the private equity world is so much more than just meeting our own bottom line.
you have greater power and voice than you realize to influence how things end up. And right now, we are
through capital allocation.
Through capital allocation. Right now,
business building.
as a very key example, we have the US and China becoming increasingly hostile with each other. We are on the brink of the US doing what they call a reverse CFIUS. CFIUS is basically a policy that says China can't invest in critical industries in the US without government approval. I think the US is about to turn it around and say no American can invest in China without getting approval, which is effectively a sanction.
Yeah.
Now, this is all terrible for all of us, because at the end of the day, if we can't figure out a way to get 1 billion Chinese workers truly integrated into the world economy so they can have a better future, and I will add, perhaps controversially, if we can't figure out how to get the Russian economy integrated into the world economy, we will continue to head on a path to conflict. Now, conflict, like I said, will be the new source of spending. So as you start to see, companies will get money because they're inventing things that are useful for conflict. But is that what we really want?
That's not one use case we don't really
It's not. So I think you have to think about this instead of just automatically going along with looking for wherever's the best bottom line. You have a role to play in this.
Absolutely. Shall we shift over to the audience? Any questions? Please put your hand up. Angelique on this side. Gentleman in the Hawaiian shirt, please.
With the, I guess, societal implications of some roles not existing in the future, government's response to that, will it just work to sort of a Black Mirror scenario where we get on a push bike and we ride really fast, or?
So shall I take that?
Please, Matthew.
So it's a good question. So I sat down with the ministers at the UK Department of Work and Pensions, so with all G20 governments on future work and everything else. Honestly, the conversations I have with government, basically when you start showing them some of these technologies, what they can do when we talk about the automation of tasks and skills, but also the democratization of tasks and skills, I've had the strategy teams of governments going, so what do we do? Literally is the first question. And I'm like, you should already kind of have a point of view. So governments basically are still kind of stuck in this universal basic income space. That's what they're generally thinking of. But when we actually have a look at artificial intelligence, AI is the tractor, it's the loom, it's the printing press. As a worker or as a society, basically you can be the people that get put out of work by AI, or the tractor. Or you can be the people who turn yourselves into the CEO of John Deere. We actually have a path. I mean, the way, if you have job automation, you take someone who's doing this and you retrain them to do this. And we have a way to do this. That's a conversation on future of education, education and training and learning and development. But we actually know how to take people from one career and put them into this. Accenture automated 17,000 jobs, didn't make a single person redundant. We know how to move entire workforces from here to here.
Actually, and I would add to this, in manufacturing, so I'm part of a company that's been building in the metaverse space for 20 years. And one of their main tasks now is working with major manufacturers to manufacture in the digital space before a single rivet and piece of metal ever come together. And when it comes to space, humans are not going to be in space. We're going to have people literally working here on Earth building things up there, because your ability to do things from remote distances is so extraordinary. So you imagine the surgeon who can now conduct a surgery with more efficacy, more accuracy from the other side of the world. You can do the same thing in manufacturing. So suddenly what you're talking about is not a world where people don't have jobs. It's a world where the best and the brightest anywhere in the world can come together to create something anywhere else.
It ups the game.
It totally ups the game.
Absolutely.
And as an example, I like the company Hopin, which is like Zoom, but has more bells and whistles. Zoom has come together. They literally never met. They were an idea in 2019. Today, last time I looked, they were worth $8 billion US. The team have never met. They don't come together. And finally on this, just to really bring it home, you don't have to incorporate anymore. Now that we're in the digital space, we can use smart contracts. Now, think about this, guys. If you can't incorporate, you're not going to issue shares, you're not going to issue debt, there's nothing for all you private equity folks to buy. You have to get your head
Post
around
lawyers.
digital contracts and
lawyers
how will
world.
you participate.
Absolutely.
That, I think, is the future.
And it takes the convergence of artificial intelligence, decentralized ledger, as well as metaverse for all of these things to happen. And we're seeing so many use cases where the convergence of the three mega trends will make use cases better. Shall we take another question on Joyce's side? Middle of the room, left of the room.
Have we already blown
Well,
their
one thing.
minds?
Oh, please, go ahead. Angelique, if you wouldn't, second row.
I think it's great. Yeah, obviously this is all fantastic. Looking at the future, but you haven't really talked about the political implications and the turmoil it will create. Because if you have the best and the brightest anywhere in the world coming together, what is that going to mean for voters when someone on the other side of the world can do it for 80% less? And then you've got poll people. I understand, yes, it can create jobs in other ways, but that short-term impact of having that disruption and turmoil within certain industries.
Pippa, you want to start with this one?
Yeah, I mean, look, we've had this for so long, and we are seeing public response, right? That arguably is the key thing that brought Donald Trump into power. But the question is it true, this argument that everyone lost their jobs and the future is worse? And I would say that actually that's not what the data is showing us. What it is showing us is that people just hate change. Now, how do we educate human beings so that they can adapt not just to change, but a much faster pace of change? And I would recommend you look at Buckminster Fuller's knowledge doubling curve, which you can Google, the great engineer. And he noticed that in the year 1900, the amount of information you needed to make a decision was doubling every century. By 1945, it's doubling every 25 years. By 1980s, when he wrote, it was doubling every year. And now IBM has confirmed, as of 2020, it's doubling every 12 hours. Now, here's the key. If you are in a silo with a particular area of expertise, you can maybe try and keep up with that, but you can't keep up with the breadth. So one of the things we have to learn how to do is to stop being specialists and how to begin to understand what's happening in other fields that's going to dramatically change
Multidisciplinary.
Right.
thinking.
So this is the era of the polymath, not the
Absolutely.
specialists. And that'll be part of the answer.
Great question. Look, we've run out of time a bit, and thank you very much for your participation. And many thanks to our panelists as well for all your insights. I hope that we've managed to help inform you a little bit, and I look forward to continuing the conversation next year.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.